House voted overwhelmingly, 280 to 150, to kill the funding for the Super Collider. That vote represented the single largest spending cut in any appropriations bill this year. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this Jurassic pork is far from being extinct. Through a labyrinth of parliamentary trickery, this SSC has again reared its dinosauric head. Today we have a chance finally to kill the largest piece of pork in the federal budget. Huge cost overrun, out of control spending by the contractor have wasted millions of taxpayer dollars. Many of my colleagues point to their own budget-cutting votes to their zeal in cutting the budget to the tune of hundreds of thousands of few billion dollars. This, Mr. Speaker, is a chance to cut $13 billion of federal spending. Vote no today, members of the House, Mr. Speaker, and kill the superconducting Super Collider.
One from New York.
Mr. Speaker, later today, the House will face a crucial test. A test that will determine whether or not we are serious about cutting the deficit. A test that will determine whether we will back up our words with deeds. I refer, of course, to the vote on the Energy and Water Appropriations Conference report. At the appropriate time, we will offer a motion to recommit with instructions to terminate funding for the superconducting Super Collider. Today's vote is a test of whether the House is willing to have its budget-cutting efforts sabotaged by a small group of conferees following their own agenda. The House voted overwhelmingly by 280 to 150 to kill the SSC in June, but the conferees capitulated to the Senate's desire to continue funding. If we accept this action from the conferees, then the House amounts to nothing more than a very expensive version of boys' state, just going through the motions of governing and leaving the tough decisions to others. Let's show the American people that we're serious about budget cutting. Vote to recommit the Energy and Water bill and terminate the very expensive, ill-advised superconducting Super Collider.
What purpose the gentleman from Indiana write?
Without objection. Mr. Speaker, today we face a major test of whether or not the majority is going to rule and cut spending for the people of this country. Not only is at stake is the vote on the superconductor Super Collider that we will hear much about today, but also the conference bill on energy and water appropriations has restored total funding, indeed increased for next year the amount to be spent on the advanced liquid metal reactor, something that a large majority of the House of Representatives voted to kill and the administration called upon us to cut. Mr. Speaker, in addition, this bill, in 11 instances out of 14 differences between the House and Senate, took the highest expenditure level that either House adopted, meaning that there was no intent, no will to make the cuts that we have all been advocating around this country. The test is to vote to recommit or to reject the conference report on the energy and water appropriations.
What purpose the gentleman from Kansas write?
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, 280 members of this body voted to terminate funding for the superconducting Super Collider. This was the largest single cut in any appropriations bill adopted by this body this year. Unfortunately, the other body included funding for the Super Collider in their version of the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill. The conference committee did not include one member of this body who voted with a huge majority when it went to conference to terminate the funding for the collider. It should come as no surprise that the conference committee quickly adopted the Senate position and ignored the will of 280 members of this body, nearly two-thirds on both sides of the political aisle. Today we will vote on that conference committee report. Mr. Speaker, we must stick to our position in the House and kill the Super Collider and save the taxpayers of this country at least $10 billion. I urge my colleagues to support our efforts to recommit the conference report with instructions to terminate funding for the Super Collider. This is our chance today to demonstrate to the American taxpayers that we are serious about cutting the deficit and cutting federal spending. I urge my colleagues to stick to their position.
Gentleman from New York, I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in just a few minutes, there will be a motion to recommit this measure with instructions to terminate funding for the superconducting super collider. This is the most important and most significant test of this body's will to cut unnecessary spending that we will face all year. The SSC really isn't the issue here. The House has already spoken out loud and clear. We voted 280 to 150 to kill the SSC in June because we felt that we could not afford the project. And what has happened since then? The Secretary of Energy has raised the cost estimate for the project another $3 billion. It keeps going up and up and up. It started at $4.4 billion, then went to $5.9 billion, and we're talking about the taxpayers' money. Then it was up to $8.2 billion. Now it's up over $11 billion, and the end is not yet in sight. And she has also said she will make sure that the department will stick to the $11 billion figure. We've heard that one before. A previous Secretary of the Energy said not one dime over $5.9 billion, and we're up over $11 billion. The collider isn't the issue. The issue is whether House members are willing to stick to their guns or be sabotaged by a small group of appropriations conferees. The issue is whether we are going to continue to conduct business as usual in this chamber or whether we're going to change in a way that will reduce the deficit. If we're going to be honest with the American people, that's the issue. The issue is whether the House is a genuine legislative body or merely a very expensive version of boy state, just going through the motions of governing and leaving the real decision to others. Our motion today will be very targeted. We're going to be very precise. It will save at least $9 billion. My colleagues, we have an opportunity to save $9 billion for the taxpayers. Yield myself an additional 30 seconds.
Recognized for additional 30 seconds.
That can only help other programs. Despite the propaganda one hears from the proponents, Mr. Myers said we won't save any money this year if we terminate the $640 million for the collider because it will go to other projects. Sure, it will go to other projects, worthy projects, but next year and the year after and the year after, $9 billion. That's a day's work well done. I urge my colleagues to vote their conscience and vote with the American people.
Time of the gentleman from New York has expired. Mr. Speaker, I give myself 3 minutes.
Gentleman recognized.
Speaker, first of all, I want to commend my friend, the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Bevel, and the ranking minority member. They have been fair in the way they have dealt with us on this issue. I appreciate that. I thank you for the time that you've given us here today. Mr. Speaker, 280 members voted earlier this year, nearly 2/3 on both sides of the political aisle, to terminate funding for the super collider. That is up from 232 last year. In the other body, last year, 32 senators voted to terminate funding for the super collider. This year, there were 42 members. My colleagues, it is clear that the tide is running in our favor. As people learn more about the super collider, more people in this body and in the other body don't think it is a good way to spend the taxpayers' money. I hope that we keep that in mind as we vote here today. We are talking about real money, as has already been pointed out, $9 to $10 billion that can be saved for the American taxpayers. So when my friends say, what's really at stake, we're not going to save very much money, I disagree. $9 to $10 billion is at stake. And to boil this down so that we can understand precisely what this means to our state, we have prepared a printout to show you state by state what the super collider will cost you. California taxpayers, listen up. This project is going to cost you $1.5 billion. Georgia taxpayers, $254 million. Illinois taxpayers, $572 million. Kansas taxpayers, $103 million. That's our share of this super collider project. Michigan taxpayers, $405 million. And New York taxpayers, $940 million. That's your state share of what this monstrosity is going to cost you. I can't explain that nor justify it to my taxpayers, and I don't believe you can explain it and justify it for your taxpayers. Let me review just basic reasons why more and more of our colleagues on both sides of the political aisle in both houses of the Congress are now coming to our point of view. First of all, the cost, as you've already heard, we were told it was going to cost $4.4 billion. Wrong. The cost estimates then went up to $5.9 billion, and then $8.25 billion, then to $11 billion, and now some people are saying it's going to cost $13 billion. And now the Secretary of Energy tells us we don't know what it's going to cost. Trust me, we will tell you next June, and we will establish a baseline at that time. And we may even recommend terminating it at that time if we can't build it for what we think we should be able to build it for. Are we going to continue to be big suckers or not? Now, in addition to that, we were told that we were going to get $1.7 billion in foreign contributions. We couldn't find enough suckers around the world to step up. Today, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself one additional minute.
I was recognized for one additional minute.
Today, Mr. Speaker, we have $65 million in the bank from people that probably depend upon us for foreign aid to fund this project. We don't have anywhere near the $1.7 billion, and we're not going to get it. Last year, the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee stood here in the well and said if we don't have those foreign contributions, I will oppose the project. My friends, we don't have those contributions. It's time to stand by our word for a change. The next point I want to make is this is the largest single cut in any appropriation bill. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, it's time for this body and all the people in this body and on the other body also to do something real to cut spending for the taxpayers of this country. We've all said we want to do it. Now we have a chance today to do it. 280 of us have already said we don't want to spend money this way. And the only reason we would flip-flop and vote differently today is because we are worried about a little bit of money in this bill for our district. Folks, this is log rolling, this is pork barreling, it's the very thing that the taxpayers are absolutely livid about. So I urge my colleagues who are thinking about flip-flopping not to do that. Your project is not in jeopardy if you stand on your principles and you vote the way you did earlier this year.
I'm the gentleman expired. Gentleman from New York. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, a senior member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Kansas was most eloquent in stating why this conference report should be voted down. The fact is that in 1990, this House, through the passage of legislation, set a baseline of a maximum contribution of $5 billion for the superconducting super collider. It is now quite evident that the total federal contribution in order to get this job done will be way over that amount because of the failure of the super collider management to accurately assess what the costs were, a lack of leadership by the Department of Energy and both the Clinton and Bush administrations to level with the public and with the Congress on how much this would cost, as well as an abject failure to get any foreign contributions that amount to anything. Now the time has come to put the lid on further expenditures. We are hemorrhaging expenditures in the superconducting super collider. This project does not deserve another year's grace by the Congress continuing to appropriate it. The only way parliamentarily that we will be able to stop expenditures for the SSC is to recommit this conference report either with or without instructions to the Committee on Conference. And for this House to give the message loud and clear to the conferees that they have got to act the cost for the super collider if they wish to get this conference report passed. I don't think anybody's pet project is in jeopardy for those who want to be consistent in voting against the super collider. But the time has come to say enough is enough on this project, and we're going to have to stand up, be tall, be consistent, and be counted on the motion to recommit.
From New York, I will be glad to yield 1 minute to my colleague from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, a member of the Science Committee, with gentleman from High Technology Matters. California is recognized for 1 minute.
Today we're debating the superconducting super collider, and we're also debating
the budget. We're debating the level of deficit spending this country will have. We are talking about an $11 billion project. And what is the purpose of this $11 billion project? When we've interviewed the scientists of the Science Space and Technology Committee, what I get, the answers I get from them are, we're spending this money to achieve a better understanding of the universe. $11 billion for a better understanding of the universe. With the billions spent on this project, we could build a fusion energy plant that would develop this new technology and give something real to mankind. We could develop technology that would make the air cleaner or our lives better. Or we could bring down the level of deficit spending by not spending the money. This country is already spending $300 billion a year more per year than we're taking in. Talk about being doomed. We are doomed. Our economy is doomed if we can't get ourselves to say no to projects like this that are totally unnecessary.
California has
I say
expired.
vote no on the motion and vote no on the super collector.
Gentleman from Kansas. Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield the gentleman from Ohio 1 minute. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection, it's so ordered.
Thank you. Earlier this summer, I stood in this chamber and spoke about Jurassic Pork, the superconducting super collider. This House voted overwhelmingly 280 to 141 to kill funding for the SSC. That vote represented the single largest spending cut in any appropriations bill this year. Unfortunately, because of parliamentary trickery, Jurassic Pork is far from being extinct. Congressman Dingell's Energy and Commerce Oversight Investigation Subcommittee held hearings on the incredible waste of the SSC. Witness after witness after witness came in and talked about huge cost overruns, in fraud, in abuse, in waste. In this, the largest pork project in this government. Mr. Speaker, I'm part of the freshman class which ran for Congress pledging to cut government waste. We can go home in our districts and talk about cutting a nickel here and a dime here and a little here and a little there. But, Mr. Speaker, voting no on this project is the way to send a message that we, in fact, are serious about cutting waste. If we mean it, it's time to put up or shut up.
Gentleman from Kansas. Mr. Speaker, I will use myself 30 seconds to make one quick point. Gentleman from Kansas, recognized for 40 seconds. One of the things that I think has to be driven home here very clearly, and that is that those of us who are rising today to oppose this conference committee report are not opposing a lot of the other provisions in this bill. Our battle is very simple. It's over funding for the super collider. That's what we're trying to kill. We have to unfortunately go through this parliamentary quagmire to get the kind of votes that we want and to send the message again to the other body that we are not in favor of further funding of this project. And that's the point that I think we need to continually drive home. I don't believe anyone believes that the chairman of our subcommittee is threatening anybody with removal of money from this bill if they vote with us to terminate the super collider. Gentleman from New York.
I yield myself 30 seconds, and I would just like to point out to my colleagues that one of the nation's leading environmental organizations, Friends of the Earth, is strongly in support of our efforts. One of the nation's leading organizations concerned about the spending practices of Congress, the National Taxpayers Union, Foursquare in our corner, wants to terminate funding for the SSC. One of the nation's leading organizations concerned about the activities of Congress, the Citizens Against Waste in Government, stands Foursquare with us. We are on the side of the American taxpayers. Vote to terminate this project.
Gentleman from Kansas. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 30 additional seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
First of all, I'm amazed by the previous speaker who said that everybody has been accommodated in this bill, therefore we should in effect vote for it, I guess was the argument. Again, my point is a very simple one, that we are talking about the super collider here, and there's no question that a lot of members have been accommodated. They've been accommodated in an effort to get their votes to vote for the big super collider, which is what we're talking about here today. That makes my point precisely. And I hope that people are listening to this. We are battling today about whether we're going to spend another $9 to $10 billion for a project that 280 members of this body previously voted against. And the only reason that they can justify flip-flopping now is because they've been accommodated. I hope we don't buy into this again.
Gentleman from New York.
yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Frank. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 30 seconds. I was inclined, Mr. Speaker, I was inclined to vote against this, but I heard what the gentleman from Kentucky had said. We haven't had the roll call yet. I was just wondering if it's too late to be accommodated. Well, I don't see the gentleman. Maybe he'll give me an answer later. Any members? Gentleman from Kansas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 45 seconds to make a point.
Recognized for 45 seconds.
The previous speaker on June the 17th, 1992, in the congressional record, you can refer to this, and he asked a rhetorical question. This is the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee. He said, can we afford the super collider? This is the chairman of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and he answered his question by saying, Mr. Chairman, after studying this issue closely, my conclusion is no. Not by ourselves. This nation no longer has the resources to go alone on a big science project. The chairman continued by saying, it has long been apparent that the federal government cannot afford to pay the full $8.2 billion to the super collider by itself. That's the previous speaker's remarks on June of 1992. Well, my friends, there's only one thing that's changed since then, and that is that the cost is not $8.2 billion. It is at least $11 billion and probably $13 billion. If we couldn't afford it at $8 billion, we darn sure can't afford it at over $13 billion.
After Mr. Bevel has the right to close, followed by the gentleman. Spirit of comedy, I would be glad to take time to yield. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. State, 1.5 minutes. The gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
The previous member spoke and said, I think we all want to cut wasteful spending and get spending under control. Well, that's just hard to believe, because if that were true, we wouldn't have seen our national debt go from $800 billion to $4,300 billion. We have a national debt of monumental proportions because members don't want to cut spending. The bottom line, in the next 5 years, spending will go up 21%, the national debt will go up 42%, $1.8 trillion added to the national debt. We're going to spend $11 billion on basic research. We can't own that basic research. We can't patent it. What we can patent are how we commercialize the basic research. But we will have spent our $11 billion on basic research. The Japanese are going to spend their money taking what we give them free and getting their patents and owning their products that they're going to put to commercial use. I urge my colleagues here to realize this is a budget vote. 280 members to 150 voted to knock out the SSC on its merit. Now we're dealing with a political process that is not allowing for a clear and decisive vote. Mr. Meyer's motion to recommit without instruction obfuscates the whole concept of what we want to do. A clear vote on the SSC, vote to recommit and knock it out. I urge my colleagues to vote to knock out the SSC, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Speaker, I give myself 30 additional seconds to make a few more points. Cost per job for this project, approximately $74,000 per job. A previous speaker said that the cost per American citizen was 3 cents. Wrong. According to my calculations, next year the Senate wants to spend $640 million. Last time I checked, the population of this country was about 250 million. So simple arithmetic tells me that next year, the cost for just next year alone will be about $2.60 per citizen next year. That kind of math is the very kind of math that has got us in the mess we're in here today. The last point I want to make is that when people say we can't save money by terminating the super collider here today, this is ridiculous. We'll have to vote in future times to spend this money. We'll have our choices then.
Yes, without objection, it's no order. Mr. Chairman, I want to make some key points as we wind down this debate. One, we heard from the very distinguished chairman of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, upon which I serve, and he talked about this project. I would remind that distinguished chairman that last year, in the well of this House, he spoke eloquently for an amendment that I supported, that said we would not proceed with this project if we didn't have a commitment signed by the President of the United States that there were as minimum $650 million in foreign contributions by June 1 of 1993. We have less than 1/10 of that. Secondly, I would like to make this point. This project started out costing $4.4 billion. Taxpayers Get this one. You ain't seen nothing yet. It started out at $4.4 billion. It's not even 20% complete. And it's not costing 5.3. No, we've upped the ante. It's not 5.9. No, we've upped the ante. It's not 8.25. No, we've upped the ante. It's up over $11 billion. And it's less than 20% complete. And for those of you who are concerned about the future health of America, let me point out that while we're going ahead with this turkey, we're denying 2 out of 3 applications for assistance, worthy applications, to the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation from investigators, from scientists who have great promise, but we can't give them the buck because we're spending it all on this. We said we're going to have foreign contributions. We haven't got the first yen yet, not the first Deutschmark, not the first peso. We are not getting foreign contributions. We're asked to fund this all ourselves. Now, what organizations outside this body have said they're with us? The National Taxpayers Union says, kill the SSC. The Citizens Against Government Waste says, kill the SSC. Friends of the Earth, one of the most respected environmental organizations, says, kill the SSC. Why? Is it not good science? No, it's good science. It simply is not affordable science. We can't afford to continue business as usual. We can't afford a system where this House says by an overwhelming vote of 280 to 150 that we're going to reject something, and then within a matter of days, we come back and say, nah, we didn't really mean it. We're going to proceed with that. We don't care. Throw caution to the wind. After all, it's only the taxpayers' dollars, taxpayers of America. Do you think you're getting a good buy with this? The answer is clearly no. And you know what the General Accounting Office said? The General Accounting Office says it's behind schedule and over budget. I say defeat this and vote against conducting the Earth glider. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 30 seconds. Without objection, it's so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I wish we could balance the budget by cutting only bad programs, but there's an institutional issue here. The process is giving us bad results. We've had a conference up. Whenever the House and the other body disagreed, in almost every case they picked the higher number, and they saved other programs not worthy of our funding, like the Advanced Liquid Metal Reactor. This may be a good program. I don't dispute the merits of it, but there is no easy way to cut this budget. We have to decide among good programs, and believe me, if this was easy, we'd have done it long ago. I urge support from my colleagues who are trying to back up what the House did, and urge the
Gentleman from Kansas. Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Indiana 1 minute. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so that we can again reinforce what the House overwhelmingly voted to do, which is to cut this budget. And my concern, as my colleague from Arizona, goes beyond just the SSC. The fact is the House overwhelmingly voted to eliminate the Advanced Liquid Metal Reactor for many very positive reasons, which documents since that time now reinforce the correctness of the House position. But what has happened in the conference committee is the House activities have been overturned. The effort to cut the budget has been frustrated. Indeed, the total bill now costs the taxpayers more than it did when passed by either the House or the Senate because of the games that get played in the other body to win votes, to keep alive what we cannot afford in this country. So this is a very serious budget-cutting issue as to whether we will stand firm and whether we will make majority rule in this country.
Time is gentleman from Indiana has expired. Gentleman from Kansas. Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Nebraska 30 seconds. Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I'm here also to urge, on the previous question. Americans around the country and Nebraskans have expressed great concern about the budget agreement, that necessary vote that we passed months ago in order to balance the budget, put us in the direction towards a balanced budget. We made tough decisions. Each of us would have done it differently if we could have, but it's something we had to do. And the Nebraskans, I say, you've got to recognize that our tax share of the Super Collider is $62.7 million over the current span of the program under current estimates. It'll probably grow. Are we Nebraskans, do we feel that the Super Collider is essential enough to tax ourselves over $62 million? I think not. I know. Thank you,
Nebraska has expired. Kansas. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself at such time as I may have remaining.
Recognized.
Mr. Speaker, when we talk about this question today on the Super Collider, those of us who are opposing the Super Collider aren't doing so because we're against scientific research. And let me point out that the chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee in 1992 also said, and I quote, "To fund this project would require massive reductions in other critical science programs, including other high-energy physics programs." Keep that in mind, my friends. And in the remaining time that I have, I hope that every member will come by the table here and look at how much this is going to cost the individual states. And I would like to have the attention of the majority leader, who's certainly to follow me here in just a second, to wrap up for the proponents. And what he may focus on is how he can justify asking the taxpayers of the state of Missouri to spend $202 million for this project. Mr. Speaker, this is a simple question. Are we going to stand for our convictions and stand the ground that we took last May or June when 280 members of this body said no to future funding of the Super Collider? I hope we do. Let's vote against the previous question on the motion to recommit and for a substitute motion to recommit.
Time has come to expire. The motion be considered as read. Madam Chair, reserving the right to order. Speaker reserving the right to object. Gentleman from New York reserves the right to object. And I won't object, but I would ask my colleague from Kansas to explain the motion to recommit, because there's some question as to whether or not this motion would affect projects other than the superconducting Super Collider.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The chair of Kansas is correct, and the chair will try to get order for the gentleman.
Mr. Speaker,
This is an important amendment, and I would hope that the members would give the gentleman his attention.
Gentleman Kansas, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I first want to commend my colleagues for that last vote. Secondly, as far as what we're doing right now, listen up, folks. What we're doing is adding an instruction to the motion to recommit the conferees, directing them to maintain the House position on the question of the Super Collider. So for those that want to kill the Super Collider, the next vote is a yes vote. So for those that want to kill the Super Collider, the next vote is a yes vote. It is a motion to instruct the conferees to stick to the House position. And let me also point out that this motion that we are about to vote on does not affect any other issue in this conference report. And I think that point needs to be made clear.